Saying, all right. So, live recording on LinkedIn and YouTube, right? So, let's get started. Charles, happy Monday.
Happy Monday.
You know you're a good friend when you make time for somebody like me on a Monday.
I do it. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think we we want to continuously discuss with any entrepreneur, any business owner like yourself, and more to continue on these discussions on a weekly basis because we know there's a lot of these AI needs and AI use cases in all sorts of businesses, but when we think about AI in general, we think like, okay, it's something that's for the enterprise level businesses, not something for medium or small. I say the opposite. It's actually for the small because the small businesses have more advantage to grow with AI and have AI be the third leg in the business, right? After your customers and customer profit or financial profit, you should have the AI as the portfolio of customers and how much revenue you bring in. You have an AI portfolio exclusively that helps to grow all these things, right? So I think we have an exciting opportunity that probably back in 2020 people thought how website will help their businesses. Well, this is far beyond a website, right? This is not just a static page that shows some information. This is
Right.
definitely a evolution where it's literally going to be AI agents, right? That's what everybody's talking about these days. These AI agents will behave just like a real person, but it will augment you as a person. So, instead of you doing everything in the work or the business, AI agents will be able to handle many of those tasks for you. So, Charles, I'm super excited because me and you kind of went back and forth to understand each other's business.
Right.
And one thing I will say, Charles, that for the rest of my life, every time I get on an elevator, instead of reading the company's name, I just read Charles Franklin over and over.
As long as you're not stuck in one or trapped, it's that's a good thing.
Well, I got your phone number, so if I can
Right.
call you, that's what I'll be doing. The first person I call in an elevator.
Yeah. But I appreciate that introduction because I look at AI as sort of a force multiplier, kind of leveling the playing field for a small business who may not have all the resources that I do as a small business elevator consulting firm. So I'm an army of one, Franklin Elevator Solutions. But AI does help me, help me, as I said, is a force multiplier.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and that's the only way I always think about it, right? I don't even call it artificial intelligence unless I have to. I call it augmenting intelligence because if it's augmenting the intelligence, it can do all sorts of things. And right now, it's very proficient in identifying and labeling, and eventually it will identify, label, and make decisions. And that decision could be that either it makes it all by itself, or it makes it with the help of the human, or it does it for the humans with human supervision, right? So there's a whole lot to unpack here, but that's the easiest way I call it is that augmenting intelligence, like you said, force multiplier with AI agents. But they're all pretty much just identifying on your behalf, labeling on your behalf, just like we will identify, we will label it ourselves. Why don't we let a system like augmenting intelligence to help us identify, to help us label? So, elevator industry, which goodness, like until I met you, I said, "What do you mean?" Right? It's just
Right.
something that's elevator. I never think about elevator, but here we are talking about elevator. So um,
Right.
I think there's a spectrum of use cases in all industries, and elevator. I think it just captured my ears because it's very static, but it's so important to almost everything we do in our, I don't know, any lives that we live. Because sometimes we said like, well, if you live in this part of the world, you probably don't use elevator that often. Well, no matter where I go, if it's a medical related or some specific services that I need, I'm using elevator. Yeah, right.
Yeah. Right.
You
Most
mentioned
of the time, most of the time, if it's over one story,
yeah,
to be handicap accessible, that's what you
yeah.
need.
And the one of the use cases you mentioned, which blew my mind away, is the fact that when the helicopter lands on top of the building, there's an elevator right there.
Right.
And you can take that use case and multiply it to many, many scenarios where you would need a helicopter pad, and there has to be an elevator that's working.
Right. It's very important. It's critical.
Literally no use of helipad if you don't have an elevator.
Right.
Wow. Some things you look at over and over, but you just don't know what to do with it, right?
Right. And then just to add, if I know you just came from, recent travel with me in Syracuse, elevators are conveyance systems. Okay. So even when you go to the airport, the moving walks, that's us. With your suitcases and things like that,
Yeah.
dumb waiters. Have you ever put your food on a tray that just it took the food away
Oh yeah.
somewhere into the back?
Yep.
That's
Yep.
us. That's us as well. We do all conveying belt systems,
Right.
vertically or horizontally.
We never discussed it, but that's manufacturing shop floor, isn't it?
Yep.
Right.
Right.
That's what I do, manufacturing shop floor, conveyor belts, right? We have to measure every single piece of things that's moving through a conveyor belt and have it precisely measured in a way that it doesn't fall apart eventually, or it's able to do 1,000 pounds of loads. So many calculations. It's incredible now that I think about it. Wow. So before we go too far into the conversation, let's do an introduction, because I think people know what elevator is. People might know what Charles is, but like, how does Charles and elevator come together?
How do we come together?
Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting question. We intersected when I was in the military, and we got basically a construction background,
Right.
and I got recruited by a major elevator company, and they gave me a promise that they would put me in the industry, no responsibility for 2 years, and just soak up knowledge, gain networks. And then they'd release me after that. And that's what they did. So they gave me a great foundation, which you really do not find with a lot of companies. It was not necessarily a boots to hard hats program, but it was a boots to executive level program, and we're going to give you a bird's eye view.
Right. Right. Yeah. And you've been in this industry for how many years now?
Jeez, don't make me age myself. Almost 20 years.
Okay. So let me tell you why I'm asking this. It's because if I have to rely on something and it's been around for 2 years, some things are okay to be around for 2 years. But
Right.
if I have to rely on something that I would never rely on unless it's been around for 20, you know why I'm getting with this.
Right.
This
Yes.
is about my safety. This is about me feeling comfortable that if I'm talking to Charles, I only want to talk to Charles, not somebody who can say, "Oh, my AI fixed your elevator." Like, excuse me, no. I'm
Right.
fixing this elevator. If it's not Charles that looking at my elevator and making sure it's safe, I don't want to be in that elevator, right?
Right.
Well, the AI inspected it for you before you got it. I'm like, nope. I'm just
No.
gonna.
You don't want to put the safety of patients and passengers in jeopardy. You need to have some human oversight over that.
Exactly.
And it's pretty easy to tell in our industry that the genuine who knows what they're as for you and AI, who knows what they're talking about and who doesn't.
Exactly, and that's something that we always have to weigh the measures, right? Both sides. Like, no matter what digital transformation can do, where's the human in the loop, the HITL, which gets missed in the conversation a lot, right? Because we're thinking about us, and then we're thinking about what we're delivering, but what's being delivered, where can the humans fit in, is something that we have to figure out. because we don't want full automation in everything, especially, let's say, for example, aircrafts.
Right.
It's happening, but do we still want to have the pilot to be there? It's critical levels of assurance that we have to say the amount of safety that we have gained so far in aviation industry. How do we improve that rather than to say let's stagnate it or let it go down a little bit? Right.
Right. And even with what I've seen in my industry, we use AI for predictive maintenance, where it analyzes data, sensors. It can reduce downtime and breakdowns, and it can tell you when something may fail in the future. Okay, but it can't fix it. Now AI will do what AI will do is they'll send those messages to a human. Now, where the breakdown, if that human doesn't do anything with the information, it's useless.
That's right. There you go. There you go. Yeah. Yeah, you can flag things all day long, but if nobody's reading what's being flagged or what's being identified and not labeling correctly, um, it's a waste, right?
Right. Because if AI can tell you you need to turn this bolt a quarter inch or tighten this, a human needs to do that. But if a human ignores it, it's useless. They're
We
useless.
were talking about bolts, but look at Boeing, right?
Yeah.
The doors
Oh,
are falling off there.
there you go.
There
Yeah,
we go.
yeah. Perfect example. You have wheels falling off.
There's three bolts
AI may
missing.
have told them that was going to happen, but nobody did anything about it.
That's been one of my highlights of my work, that we've actually done this sort of bolt wrenching, and how many times have this bolt been turned is part of the measuring the KPIs, right? So there's so many ways to look at AI. So last week when Kevin was here, we talked about these need for Chat GPT, Claude. But when you bring up sensors and you bring up data, you're bringing up this whole another side of AI, where now you start seeing the total forest of AI, right? Because Chat GPT is just a tree in that total ecosystem, the whole forest, right? Now that you're talking about sensors and data, it actually does light up a lot of people's eyes, because they think like, I would never say that when I think about AI, because it's literally a system that's identifying something and it's labeling something, right? Whatever that is. But somebody has to make decisions off of those identifying and labeling, right? So
Right.
when you say, sensors and data that's being fed, I think that's super important for everybody who probably is listening to this conversation. Will say, if I didn't know this, now that I know, what do I do next, right?
Right.
Because it means that you probably have a lot of these devices that's already there, that you identify, you label things with. These sensors are already in place. How do you utilize the sensors even furthermore to say, now it's actually making decisions on my behalf, or it's allowing me to make decisions in an augmentative way, right? It's augmenting my intelligence. So wide discussion, wide spectrum, but one topic that I always bring up that kind of gets everybody to think like, okay, wait, you're saying that all these sensors, all the data that it collects, all the data can be processed. And just like we've been creating dashboards for so many years, those business intelligence dashboards,
Mhm.
we can have an actual dashboard that's far more sophisticated. Like, yeah, AI is not doing something so dramatic. AI is just taking it to a whole nother level, but it's still based on what it is that you're used to already. Instead of calling it a dashboard, we'll call it a digital twin. And digital twin is far more effective than a dashboard, because dashboard augments your intelligence too, but you have to think a little bit extra to make that decision through dashboard. Where in digital twin, your decision becomes snap, because you're able to actually visualize what it is that you're making decisions on, and it has, let's just call it what it is. It's based on geospatial data, and that geospatial data has all these sensors everywhere. So if you own a medical industry, let's just call it that, with a helipad on top, right?
Mhm.
You got an elevator, that's one sensors of data, and you got a helipad that has a helicopter and no helicopter, that's another set of data coming from the sensors. You have cameras, and these cameras are able to provide you with information that otherwise you would say, I would never gather it, right? But now, because you have digital twin, you can feed every single hardware which you call sensor, feed that into the digital twin, and the digital twin is able to interact based off of it. Now here where it gets actually better. Based off of those sensors, you can click and point at things and say, do this. Now these sensors becomes a full feedback loop. Instead of just sending you data, now you can feed it data and it will actually take action based off of your request, right? But that's depending on how sophisticated your hardware is. But even without those hardware integration or hardware improvement, you can create digital twin capability, right? So if you look at SAP, SAP is a good example. They've had this for 10 years now, right? They use computer vision to look at your elevator over and over and say, that door is actually skipping 3 beats when it was closing. Something is either stuck under it or needs to go do a maintenance on it because that door is going to break if you don't do that.
Right.
If you don't take care of it. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So you got these sensors and how to tap into those sensors even furthermore to do, I don't know, revenue generation or bringing your OpEx down, any sort of capabilities that you want to develop, you can develop it. And you can develop it today far better than you could in 10 years ago. What do you think?
So when I think about that, and what I think about is AI, for example. When you think of an elevator, you go and you push a button and you. In a shock trauma event, there's no time to push buttons and wait. Seconds count. So AI can tell the helicopter's coming. Elevator, come up to the top floor now. Open doors, stay open, because there's going to be a patient that's coming in.
Right.
Now, a lot of times you don't have time to talk about or think about pushing the button and waiting. That's a 3 minute, could be a 2 to 3 minute wait.
Yeah.
And that's the difference between a coma or not. There's also other end user experiences. If you take it outside of the healthcare realm, I could think about where we use where AI can be used, where it says, hey, at this type of floor, especially when you're dealing in mega cities, metropolises, where you have thousands of people living in one building and you have multiple elevators, for example, park on this floor. At 8 a.m. is our rush hour. I need you to be here on the 15th floor, the 25th floor, the 40th floor, and the 60th floor. And during lunchtime, you can relax a little bit, right? And then AI says, hey, 5 o'clock, it's dinner time, or it's Saturday, or it's a Sunday. So I think it also can increase revenue that way.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of runway there in terms of my industry.
Yeah, it's just thinking out loud. We can explain all these use cases in a bucket and just a flat lay it out and just have millions of use cases. And what needs to happen that as people are thinking through it, one thing that they will identify is that just like use cases, data is all over the place, right? Like if you have them in a bucket, it is still hard to sort those use cases out and say, which use case do I pick? Because this use case has to go with this use case, so that use case can feed into this use case. So it's scalable and it's also sustainable, because just because you can scale it doesn't mean you can keep paying for these services, right?
Mm-hmm.
It becomes expensive in time. So you cannot have use cases stack and rely on somebody else to take care of these use cases without without blowing up the prices, right? Ballooning the prices. So you have tons of these use cases, and a lot of the CEOs and CFOs and CIOs are concerned, like, yeah, their use cases are great, but what about it in the future? What about it 2 years from now, right? I think one of the big takeaway for any CFOs and CIOs that I've been talking to, they talk about the privacy side of things. They talk about so many other angles. But I say, like, look, if you let somebody else take care of this tool or use case for you from outside, you're going to have those outside problems. Right. But you'd rather have the inside problems, as in you can contain those problems internally and keep the cost down. So that way, you're able to fix and maintain those problems in-house, right? So what do I mean by that? I'll walk you down the example here. What you just described, that helicopter approaching, the pad is getting ready, the doors are open, elevators up on 15th floor. That means you have well coordinated communication, right? And when
Right.
people think about AI, they don't think much about communication. And I literally, if I could just say one thing about AI, I would say if you're not using AI for communication, you're doing it wrong, right? AIs are supposed to be good for communications between all sorts of different codes that you have all around your building, all around your business process. But if I have to relabel that communication AI to something else, I would call it a calm technology. And that's what it's known for, is calm technology. Calm means it doesn't make any noise. It's a silent AI. Nobody even knows it's there. But when it goes out of loop, you should know that somebody has to really pay urgent attention to it, right? Um, when you're talking about that helicopter approaching the helipad and the elevator needs to be there, I mean, if you can think about it in your daily life, right? If you were just walking around your house and everywhere you walk, the light comes on, the AC hits up, it's because it's able to detect your presence, right?
Right.
That's the kind of communication we're talking about. The fact that you are there, system is to be up, and system is to, activate, right? Activate and get something done. Make a decision on if it's Charles Franklin and if his body temperature is this much, how much should the temperature be in order to make him comfortable?
Right.
That's the calm technology. That's that silent AI, right? It's communicating with your thermostat or something that's measuring your body heat, right? Um, you can walk around your house. The TV is on, and as you're watching, it should go on pause based on your preference. Yes, it can, because there is a camera probably inside of your house that's watching where you walk. Right?
Mm.
And if you're nearby, it's going to be able to say, "Yep, he's nearby," so he can listen in because that's a music that's playing. Do you see how sophisticated the system gets because
Yeah.
it can communicate with each devices in your house? So these kind of capabilities are something that we can tap into today, right? It's just a matter of how do you scale and sustain it over time is what becomes the question, right? Because if you really think about it, what's the return on investment on doing this helicopter activity, or the use case of the helicopter approaching?
Mm.
2 minutes out, right? Who else needs to be notified? Wow, the whole hospital knows who needs to be where by the helipad downstairs on the bottom floor where the elevator will stop and the patient will offload.
That's a
You know what I
great
mean?
point.
That's a coordination of not just the elevator and a helicopter, but the whole hospital, the whole building becomes a digital twin capability, where if you were to say, I want to see how this will work out. So you can go to NVIDIA, you can go to Microsoft, you can go to Siemens, you can go to GE and say, create a digital twin of my building. And it probably costs less than a penny to do that at this point. Create a digital twin of my building and tell me how fast can the elevator come up and down. How can Charles come in and talk about this elevator? And how can somebody who actually is an operational manager can tap into Charles's elevator and say, this is how I coordinate all my efforts? And he can create a simulation of all activities in all floors, who's where, how long does it take a nurse to run from one corner to another or walk from another corner to corner? So that way everybody's in place whenever that patient is coming through. Because if you think about it, you don't want to risk a baby approaching the hospital and missing a beat because somebody missed a step, right?
Right.
That's how sophisticated it needs to be. But these are worth it, right? Not all sophistication matters, but some sophistication is just necessary, right? Um, yeah, you had me going, brother. You brought up a very, very good use case. Like I said, silent AI or calm technologies are the way of the future, and we're gonna have a bunch of those coming up.
Right. And I think that's it's all important, very important when it comes to patient care. Like I said, if it can make you even 5% more efficient, which I'm sure it can do much more, that can mean a life. So
Right.
it's extremely important. So you made a good point when you have to connect the dots. It doesn't the story only starts when the helicopter lands. There's a lot that goes into that. You have to have an ER surgeon. Okay, then you have pneumatic tubes. Someone needs to send down sterile utensils. I mean,
Gotcha.
it can go a long way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's very interesting you bring that up
Yeah.
as an add a new perspective.
Yeah, because we are so heavy with hardwares that we have to carry, right? And what I mean by that is that you're not necessarily carrying all your hardware in a satchel, right? You have all your hardwares laid out everywhere in your house, everywhere in your hangar where you park your aircraft, or in your hospital, right? But if you were to carry it, you would see how heavy they are, you know.
Mhm.
And if you think about hardware right now, and you're thinking like, okay, they all have a single thread between those hardwares. They do something. They all do the same. They all identify something, right? They all identify and they all have to label. And if they mislabel, if they label it incorrectly or put some too much pressure onto a label that doesn't necessarily mean anything, how do they label properly? We've been working on these two things for a very, very long time. And it sort of has been feeding us into our decision making capability, because that's what our brain does actually. Using 5 sensors, we make lots of identification and label and make decisions, and we make 35,000 decisions a day.
Mhm.
We don't call it that, but that's literally what brain is doing, is making decisions,
Right.
because every word matters and every word is a decision, or every process of making that word come out of your mouth is a decision. So if you think about it from that perspective, easiest way to understand hardware, software, and all these capabilities is that what's making an identification and what's making that labeling? How can I improve that labeling based on all hardwares that I already have? And how does that feed into my decision making without changing any of this hardware? Because these hardwares are very expensive. To replace them is to say, let's build a new building. Why not? Right?
Mhm.
um, we have a 15-story buildings in the middle of Chicago. Why not just build a whole another one, right?
Yeah.
So you got decision making. So how do you incorporate your hardwares that you already have and make decisions with them? And the reason a lot of the ways these conversations don't come up is because all the conversation is very much about a specific product, right? It doesn't look at the full ecosystem, and that's what we specialize on. We look at the full ecosystem to identify in your ecosystem what feeds into what, and how do you get the best KPIs possible so that way it's scalable and sustainable, right? And another question that comes up is that, like, oh, my hardwares are kind of old. Well, okay, look, if you have data everywhere here and you have use cases up here, so let's call it, like, you found 100 use cases instead of a 15-story building in Chicago, and then you have data just laid out in the flat, right? You have tons more data than the use cases. What's missing, and that's the part of conversation that's very important, is that how do you get this data to meet the use cases? In the middle, what you need is the data processing.
Mhm. And what does that look like?
Exactly, exactly. That's the questions, and that's the kind of framework that you have to put in. So, like, this data processing, what do I do for this data processing? Because I don't want to change my hardwares, because the hardwares are sitting on top of the use cases, right? You can identify hardware and say, this is the use case for this hardware, and here's the data for it. And how do I process that data is how I'm going to end up having that use case where, I have this AI machine learning now, right? And when you start thinking about it that way, you're like, oh, wait, so I don't need to spend that much money actually. But if I have to, first, how do I make sure that everything I already have, I can process those data and actually have a, say, proof of concept at minimum, or even deploy it. But as I deploy it, I see the benefit of it. And I say, like, you know what? Over time, I'll start shifting this hardware around, buy new ones, replace them, whatever the case is. But I can see how beneficial these things are, right? I can convince my whole organization to say, yep, there's the data right here. We figured out how to process this data. And because we can process this data, these use cases are actually becoming alive, right? That
Right.
how's that for approaching,
I would think, yeah, I would think, yeah, and it's interesting perspective because I have no shortage of data.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
I have way too much data. I can even It's dizzying to look at the amount of data that I have.
That's right.
And then I can, but the use cases I would consider from my perspective, each individual hospital across the country. They each have their own issues and problems.
Yeah.
Not everyone has a helipad. Some of them have a helipad on the ground.
Yeah.
Um, So I consider the use cases to be their individual problem. It is difficult to take all of this data and streamline it and tailor it to individual needs.
Yeah.
180 hospitals across the country, for example. How do you tailor it? Because Chicago problems and New York problems are different than Idaho problems.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I always say it in the conversation because not everybody I talk to is a techie, so we always talk business. And I said that, every business has a problem. You just don't have my problem, right?
Right.
We all have problems. You just don't have my problems, But all of our problems has a thread, which is the data, and how's that data is being processed and how the use case goes. So if you look at just these three stacks right here, forget the hardware, forget the digital twin, forget everything else. You could come up with any solutions you're looking for if you just knew what the data is and how do you process that data and how do you plug that into your use case. Now, let me give you the sweetest example of all of this because everybody can relate to this. Your Excel sheet is your data processing mechanism. Literally, how do you process your data? If I ask you that today, you might say, I do it through an Excel sheet. And that's it. That's how you process the data because that Excel sheet fits into one of those use cases, right?
Right.
It's not an AI machine learning use cases. It's just a use case of your problem sets, right? Because you don't create an Excel sheet for a car dealership. You create an Excel sheets for elevators, right? Car dealership has their own Excel sheets. They all have data. They're all processing this data. And how does that fit into use cases? This hasn't changed in the last 40 years, right? Or 50 years. I mean, this ledger system has been around for thousands of years, right? As long as we can count back in days. And when you think about your specific business, let's talk about the small business part of it, right? If you started a business 30 years ago and you're using Excel sheet, you are probably one of those advanced businesses that are like, man, you can afford Excel sheet? Wow, you're doing good. You make enough money to afford Excel sheets, right? But these days, it's just kind of going in the other direction. It's kind of like, okay, how do I have Excel sheets and more, right? So that way, these data, I can keep it, I can maintain it, and I can use it, right? Keep it private, keep it secure, keep it safe. So you see how difficult it gets for data processing at this point? But that's where the small business advantage comes in, right? Because if you start thinking about your data collections that you have, all the data that you have over here, how do you start collecting those data so that way, as you grow, this data grows with you, and this data are actually valuable enough, right? So if you look at a 5-year life cycle, you're able to say, if Franklin starts collecting this data today, 5 years from now, this is where this data should end up at as a monster. Monster data. You don't want to raise a monster that you have to say, you know what, I got to redo this monster again, right? I have to actually raise this monster. That way I don't have to spend more money on 5 years later to say, I got to redo this thing because I started it wrong. And that's what I mean by small business benefits, because enterprises already have those monsters. They live in their basement. They live in their databases, right? These monsters that you can develop as a small business and grow it, there's multiple ways to look at it, but the best way to put it is that just like you would have AI portfolio, you will want to have a data portfolio, right? And this data portfolio is not necessarily something that is as strange as like, adding a new leg to the stool, right? It could be that data portfolio for your customers, the buyers, and your finance, your data portfolio for your finance, right? So you have data portfolio, which is all the demand signals, all the customers, and then the finance side, which is another data portfolio that, all your financial activities, right? And then you have, of course, an AI portfolio that feeds into all two of these, right? They're always continuously are working together. They're communicating, right? Finance, your, I guess, what do you call a customer? Client, right? All information that you need for your demand signal processing. So you got your clients here, and you got your finance, and you got your AI, and they're all three communicate with each other. So that way you have a good visual, and you have a good understanding of your business, good grasp of all the data. They're all happening simultaneously. And for an enterprise, they have to fork out. You can imagine how much money they're spending to handle these situations. But for a small business, if we learn anything from the enterprises, you want to see the big business say, okay, if they have this problem, how do I avoid myself from having that problem, right? How do I grow 6 months from now and say like, you know what, I'm going to start all over again, but use the data for 6 months rather than 5 years worth of data, right? And the last point I want to make about that data portfolio is that this data portfolio is going to be as expensive to buy it from you as much as you put into it. So that means whatever data portfolio or data monster you create, if it's worth it for other people's business, you can sell those data portfolio. I'm not necessarily talking about selling private data. I'm talking about data that works for other businesses, so they don't have to go through developing this data for 5 years because you already developed it.
Right. Yeah, I can see that.
Yep.
Client services, for example.
Exactly.
I've developed programs that I could take to a completely different system, no matter what client base that is, and say, hey, this is a best practice, right?
Best practice, exactly. Yeah, industry best practice. So how do you take those data sets and move them around and they work for any business you put into it, because that's how they're structured. And that's what it means to structure it very early on. So that way, 5 years later, when they turn into a monster, they look actually pretty, right? They don't look like something that nobody wants to touch. What kind of data set did you make, man? So
yeah.
But
that's great. This has been great discussion. I see. I have a hard stop, but this has been great. This has been great talking points. We definitely need to stay engaged. There's a lot here that a lot of takeaways and a lot of things that I believe that I can use moving forward, just to even, for my business that I've already launched, to also other day-to-day things. So a lot to think about there, and I definitely want to stay engaged to know how I can take that, because you really got me in when you said the big data set, and how do you get to that user and what their specific problem is. That's what I do, and so that would be, I'm really interested in that.
Well, I'll tell you that one takeaway you have to do is that AI's biggest component is early detection. And you talked a lot about early detection. Let's just call it what it is. It's all about early detection. And early detection.
What early detection?
Early as in like it gives you an insight way before anything.
Oh, yeah, predictive. Yeah, okay, gotcha.
Predictive analytics. But let's say, for example, recently they said breast cancer, right? They detected breast cancer in its 5-year infancy, 5 years before that breast cancer actually grew into the actual breast cancer.
Right.
So those are the kind of things that AI has been able to do for very, very, very long time. It's just that now it's very sharp, right? It's very focused, and it can do it in a heartbeat. So until next time, my friend, I'm looking forward to this conversation, and I hope everybody that's listening to this conversation benefited from it as much as you have benefited from it. I benefit from every time I talk to you, because I learn things in such a different way that I'm just like, yep, never thought about it that way. But that's the beauty of having Charles Franklin on my side, right?
Hey, you too. I'm right back at you.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you.